Hello and welcome to Taming and Securing Unstructured Data with Rubrik and AWS. Today's webinar is sponsored by Rubrik and AWS and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media and I'm delighted to be your moderator for this discussion panel, presentation, and demo. Now, before we get to today's great content, we do have a few housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in our webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you ask. A Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be experiencing. A browser refresh will fix most audio, video, or slide advancement issues, but if that doesn't work, just let us know there in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. Now, second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several great resources. I'd especially like to call your attention to Zero Lab's State of Data Security Report, a NAS Cloud Direct Solution Brief, an ebook on cloud protection, and a link to set up a meeting with Rubrik and AWS, and you'll see a little bit more about that later on. But again, a lot of great resources in there. Grab them. I recommend grabbing them now rather than forgetting about them until the end and then suddenly the handout section is gone. Now, third, at the end of this webinar event, we'll be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for that prize. Official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. Now, finally, one of the best benefits of this event is the opportunity to ask a question of our great panel of expert presenters. So to help encourage your questions, we have a special additional prize. That's another Amazon gift card, this one for $50 for the best question. After the event is over, we'll look at all the questions that came in, pick out the very best one, and contact that prize winner. So with that, let's get to today's fantastic content. It's my pleasure to introduce you to our presenters today. We have Natasha Loeffler-Little, who's Principal Product Manager at Rubrik. We have Girish Chanchlani, who's Principal Solutions Architect for Amazon Web Services. And we have Joe Harlan, who's GTM Technical Lead at Rubrik. So Natasha, Girish, and Joe, welcome. Thanks all of you for being here. And I'll turn things over to Natasha to get us rolling.
Thank you, Scott. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for tuning in today. Thank you, Joe and Girish, for being here. You know, we're going into a weekend right now as we're recording this where the Formula One race in Monaco is starting. And I think the subject of unstructured data has, the same complexity, the need for precision, and the excitement. And I'd love for you two to begin with talking about what drew you to the subject of unstructured data and is exciting you to talk about it today with our listeners. How about you, Girish?
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me, first of all, Natasha. Happy to be here. I'm Girish Chanchlani. I'm a Principal Partner Solutions Architect at AWS, and I work in the APO, where APO stands for Amazon Partner Network organization, where we work with very closely with storage partners like Rubrik, right? This is a subject that has been, at my, very close to my heart, right? I was an engineer before working at AWS, and I worked on data protection systems specifically to protect NAS data. So, excited to talk about this subject today with you all.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I think having felt that pain firsthand. And Joe, how about you? I'd love to hear what drew you to the subject, because I know that you're passionate about that and you're also passionate about Formula One. So let's hear it.
Absolutely. Yeah, no problem. So Joe Harlan here, go-to-market technical lead out of Austin, Texas. I've been with Rubrik about 2.5 years. Honestly, most of my career was actually on the customer side. I managed a lot of NAS platforms in my time. And I've watched with some of the organizations I work for, I've watched the data explode into levels of almost, borderline insanity. Like lots and lots of data winds up in the unstructured data space on the NAS platforms. And data protection is a pretty heavy challenge in that space. It's not something easy to tackle once you push beyond a threshold of capacity. into the petabyte scale era. So the product that we'll be discussing today was really designed to address those challenges, and it's extremely exciting to share with everyone here today. So thank you.
Thanks, Joe. And I think that's exactly where we want to start, because the problem, and you both have more personal stories to share. And Joe, I'll have you tee us up. I mean, what's sort of the macro environment with the problem and why we're talking about cyber threats and backing up data?
Yeah, absolutely. So oftentimes, we talk to customers, and as an organization, Rubrik, of course, focused on data security, data protection. We'll have conversations about protecting a large, broad set of data. And one of the things that almost invariably comes up is, okay, so if we look at all of the data that the customer is managing as an organization, the lion's share of it winds up being an unstructured data set, data they're keeping on NAS platforms, data generated by users, by applications, by devices. And this data set is just endlessly growing. Oftentimes we make jokes with customers because we talk about archive and we talk about purging data, and they're like, yeah, we don't do that, right? A lot of customers, they realize they keep their data for seemingly forever, unfortunately, in some ways. And so this important data that they've accumulated over the years of their existence that they keep in these NAS frames is also subject to threat by these threat actors that come in and land ransomware in the environment. And one of the things that they often do is they go after the backups for the data before they go after the data, so that your ability to recover and your need to pay their ransom feels ever more imminent. And so really it's all about protecting the data, because all we can do nowadays is assume breach, assume that all of our perimeter defenses, our network defenses, and everything all the way down to the data fails us before they finally get in and they start going after what we prize the most, the life's blood of our organization.
Yeah. And to your point, like, this is a broad problem. As you said, this is exactly what Rubrik focuses on in terms of data security. And you've started to highlight some of these very specific problems with unstructured data that make the sense of overwhelm dealing with the problem seem very, very difficult. And what we're bringing here today, I'm going to call this is my pit crew right here. We've got AWS and Rubrik together, is really how you as the listeners can start to break down, looking at that growing amount of data, the techniques that have been used, and how you can start to ask different questions to get yourself over that hump and either optimize what you're doing today, or some of you may also be starting this journey. And we've got two folks here that are the folks that we want to talk to about getting that race car ready to better handle unstructured data, right? And again, we do look at it from a perspective of resilience. And I would love to start with, what types of questions should folks be asking when they're looking at either optimizing or starting to do something better in terms of data security with their unstructured data? So, Joe, why don't you kick us off here and talk about, in the client conversations you're having today, what are some of the key things you're having them focus on? And then Girish, I'm going to have you also talk a little bit about that. And then we're going to get into some solutioning of these, how we as a team have been able to deal with that.
For sure. So, a lot of environments have sometimes a lot of different solutions to wrangle all of this data. Some organizations standardize on a single platform. Some do not. Some have a variety, and love to pit vendors against one another to ensure cost efficiency over the life of those devices. So your data may be spread out across on-prem and in the new world, hybrid, really. So in the cloud as well. And so being able to meet that data where it lives and protect it to a place that's safe or outside of the attack surface by these threat actors, giving you a copy of data that you can trust in the event that you should need it the most, and being able to recover. And really that requires you to maintain a copy that's independent of any one platform, captured in such a way that it could be recovered to anywhere when the time arises. And then given the sheer size and scale of this data set as it continues to grow well into the petabyte scale, I think we've left the terabyte era well behind by now. You've got to look to new ways to protect these data sets. One of the more common ways today for large-scale NAS is just simply snapshots and replication. That works really great if we're talking, business continuity, disaster recovery type scenarios, acts of God, fire, floods, hurricanes, etc. That's okay if we're worried about losing a data center, but it's not okay if the threat is, an organization moving into the environment, going after your backups, meaning deleting those snapshots, taking those off of the table for you from a recovery perspective. That can absolutely hinder your ability to return the organization to service and put this data
Mhm.
back into action. So being able to act rapidly and determine, what to do here as well is critical in terms of those types of recoveries and having the tool chain to be able to do so.
Yeah. I think those are great. So I heard, there's a couple things, and if I were to bubble it up, like we've got the questions listed here. So maybe take a screenshot. These are good starters. What's underneath that you can start to look at, well, what is the landscape of my on-premise footprint and my cloud footprint? And Girish is going to talk to us a lot about the migrating to the cloud piece too, right? Like there are some operational as well as technical considerations that you want to look at when you are assessing the whole environment, right? I've got that right, Joe?
Absolutely.
Okay. And Grish, would you add anything to that? Other questions that you think specific to on-prem to cloud that you would like to add for folks to start thinking about?
No, so first of all, I would totally agree with you guys on this one here. The main challenge that NAS data brings in is the sheer size of it, right? As Joe
Mhm.
mentioned, it is no longer in terabytes, it is in petabytes and even exabytes scale, right? And then older technologies like NDMP. I used to work on NDMP a really long time back, and I know that there are certain challenges there. For example, you can only do 9 incremental backups. After that, you have to do a full backup. Now, imagine having to do a full backup for 100 petabytes of data, right? I mean, just does not scale. So you definitely need a different way to think about this problem to be able to capture the changes, right? So that is one. I would focus on. The second one would be that Joe covered to a certain extent is the scalability of the solution. Just because of the sheer size of data, you need a solution that can keep your data, keep your backup data in on a scalable medium, right? And in terms of scalability, I'm talking about the architecture of the product, uh, where keeping the indexing or the cataloging information of these files or this unstructured data becomes extremely important.
Mhm.
Tomorrow, if you have to go and search for a file within this data set, right, it should be extremely easy for you to do that. That's one. And second would be, you're using a very scalable medium on the back end to store your backup data, which grows infinitely, right? I mean, you don't have to go on, we are very well aware of the on-prem world where every now and then you have to, you run out of capacity, you go add a new array and to copy the data over to that. It's a painful cycle, right? So you want to avoid any of
Mhm.
that. Uh, yeah, those would be the two important
Yeah.
points I would want to focus
I
on.
like that. And what I'm also hearing, so like for the folks who may be starting this journey, you need to anticipate basically massive growth. So start to think very earnestly, I'll say, about the tipping point when you're going to reach a point where you cannot find the files. You're going to struggle with the architecture that is going to allow you to do things in both a cost-effective and speedy manner. And if you're optimizing for the model, you need to look at something that's going to basically sustain this massive growth and allow you to be able to have business continuity across. And I would say like operational efficiency would also maybe be a better way of saying that. So I think those are great. And let's actually talk about the architecture, because this is one of the basic recommendations we could make is use the technology that's available. And this is why we're excited to have Grish here to talk about the infrastructure that AWS has. So Grish, I'd love for you to walk us through the capabilities that are available and how they're specifically important to the unstructured data protection job to be done here.
Absolutely happy to do that. So, let's start off with the AWS global infrastructure that powers our services. I'm sure most of the viewers would be aware of this, but I quickly want to highlight, So as you see on the map here, right, we have multiple AWS regions indicated by these blue dots. We have a total of 31 regions available today across the world, and we are rapidly expanding to include 5 more regions that will be coming online in the near future. So when you look at an AWS region, right, a region represents a geographical area such as Virginia or North Virginia or California, and uh, so large areas right there. And then within a region is composed of multiple availability zones. So multiple availability zones connected together form a region, right? And then an easy way to think about an availability zone is to think of it as a collection of data centers. So these collection of data centers, form the availability zone, and then multiple availability zones form a region. And the design is on purpose here. The idea is that these AZs are separated from each other by a considerable distance to guard against isolated failures such as flooding or maybe fires in a single city, right? So as to speak. So if that happens, if you're using our regional services like Amazon S3, so with Amazon S3, we keep at least 3 copies of data spread out across the region, right? So at a minimum, we'll keep 3 copies, an individual copy in each availability zone. So if something was to happen to a single availability zone or maybe 2 availability zones, your data is always accessible from the availability zone that is online, right? So you are not impacted from that perspective. And this is the reason why Amazon S3 provides 11 nines of durability. And S3, why we're talking about S3 is because S3 is used as a repository, right, to keep your valuable NAS backups here with NAS Cloud Direct. So the key point I would highlight here is that AWS regions are spread out worldwide, and you can choose to use the AWS services in a region that is closest to you for lowest latency and maximum performance.
Yeah, super strong infrastructure base, right?
Absolutely.
And keep talking to us about this, because I think
Yeah.
there are some other really key points that we need to hit on from an infrastructure perspective that are super important to unstructured data.
Absolutely. So here is a quick look at the wide variety of storage services that AWS offers. These are categorized by object, block, and file, and the key services under those categories. So under object, we have Amazon S3, which is a very popular storage service for storing backup data. And in this context here, and Amazon S3 was the first service that AWS released right way back in 2006. So and under block, we have Amazon EBS, which is network attached block storage. And under the file services, we have Amazon EFS, and then our FSX offering, which is basically managed file systems, right? So under that, we have FSX for NetApp ONTAP, for Windows servers, Lustre, and then OpenCFS. Now, towards the bottom, in addition to the storage services, AWS offers a wide variety of data transfer services that help our customers move large amounts of data to AWS in an efficient and cost-effective manner. Now, this category of services includes AWS Direct Connect, which gives customers a dedicated bandwidth from their data centers to AWS. So, extremely important when you're doing these large NAS-based backups or transferring the data across, right? Especially for your very first full backup. And then we also offer services like AWS Snowball that give customers the option of moving data out of band, bypassing the network on ruggedized storage devices that we at AWS can ship over to you to your data centers, and then customers can copy the data onto these physical devices. From a security perspective, highly secure, right? We have encryption, AES 256 encryption, as well as the hardware is extremely secure, right? So you can copy the data onto these devices, send it over to us at AWS. We'll copy the data from these devices onto Amazon S3. So that's another way to achieve your data migration to the cloud.
Right. And some of this, I'm going to pull forward some of the talking points we were going to go through in a little bit. But Joe, some of this is mirrored on, you and I call it we're going to nerd out so we can scale out, with how Rubrik has approached a similar topic. So can you talk a little bit about that here now, to talk about some of the data security elements and technology that Rubrik has built to go with the theme of what we're talking about here, with a variety of services, really focusing on cost and scale?
Yeah, absolutely. So, with the capability that we're going to describe today with the product NAS Cloud Direct being able to use any tier of Amazon S3, including the Glacier tiers, we enable the ability to move into Amazon with your data set in the form of a copy of that data that is completely independent of the source storage array technology. So looking here under the file technologies that Girish just covered, we can essentially recover into those within the cloud after having protected the data from its original source on-prem. So adding flexibility and independence to the data set gives you the ability to recover anywhere you should need. So if you lose the access or capability to leverage your data center from any point forward, and that data has been sent to S3, then recovering it onto one of the supported file services in Amazon is absolutely achievable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I brought up the slides. I updated what we were talking about.
Yeah, perfect. So yeah, this is getting into the basic architecture of what Rubrik is offering with NAS Cloud Direct. So it is a SaaS delivered service for unstructured data protection that operates incrementally forever. So you take a first full backup, and you don't have to take another one again in 9 days, like Girish described, right? We're actually incremental forever. So we're just going to detect the changes over the frequency of the assigned policy and protect the data as it changes over time. Now, in this diagram, you're essentially seeing a sequence of array technologies and protocols that we support from an API level. So for Dell Technologies, we support their PowerScale platform. For NetApp, the FAS and AFF NAS systems, Pure Storage FlashBlade, as well as Cumulo Core, which is software-defined NAS storage for you bring in hardware. Now, we also have support for generic NFS and SMB platforms. This allows us to protect things at not an API integration level, but at a generic level. It also allows us to recover into platforms that speak those same protocols. So I mentioned platform independence here. It's one of the key tenets of the product, the ability to protect something that is shared via SMB or NFS on one platform and recover it back to that same protocol on yet a different platform, should that need arise. So this product, the way it operates as a SaaS solution is it leverages a stateless virtual machine or virtual machines that you can deploy in a scale-out manner adjacent to the data sets that you're looking to protect. And from there, we're able to write rapidly using the proprietary technology that's built there, using a custom NFS and SMB client I'll get into, really the race car of the whole thing here, that's able to move that data rapidly out to the cloud or to an on-prem object or NFS storage target, or both, depending on how you want to compose the policy. So great flexibility here to get that data outside of the blast radius and independent from that source storage array that is possibly a target from threat actors.
Yeah, maybe we do that double click and then we'll come back and talk about the storage tiers that are available with Girish, because as you're talking through the technology that Rubrik offers and that race car, going back to this awesome infrastructure that you have with AWS and the options, like what is the cloud drawing? What's underneath the cloud that we've drawn here as a picture? Like there's some really intense, awesome things that we need to cover there. So Joe, go ahead and give us the double click on the race car, and then Girish will come back to what's in the cloud icon.
Absolutely. Yeah. So as a SaaS delivered service, the way this platform operates, the way it's deployed is essentially through Rubrik Security Cloud. The customer can manage their unstructured data protection. We deploy these VMs adjacent to the storage arrays. The VMs really contain the secret sauce. They are the race car. So the founders of the technology that we acquired to build this product a couple of years ago actually sat down and took what I love to call the stock car approach or the race car approach, right? They poured out the NFS and the SMB client onto the table and they stripped it for weight. Then they rewrote the whole stack, making it efficient for data protection. If you look at the standard protocols that exist in the marketplace today, the open source versions or even the proprietary ones unique to a given operating system platform, those protocols act in a very polite manner with respect to accessing file data over NFS and SMB. It's kind of an analogy like walking up to a door, knocking on it, waiting for someone to answer. Imagine that being the directory I'm trying to traverse. And then once I'm in the directory, it's like walking around and shaking the hands of every file, politely introducing yourself and asking if it's okay to read their data or not. That's very nice if you're a user or an application and you're very concerned with those sorts of behaviors being the polite way or the consistent way to access the data. But when we're talking about data protection, speed and efficiency is the game. And so the way that the product was rewritten from this perspective was more like a SWAT team. They walk up to every directory, kick the door down, walk in the room and kidnap all of the files and leave as quickly as possible. So less of the calls that are made by the product are these inflated sets of calls that are the polite approach. These are more, I need to access this data so that I can make a copy of it, so that I can index what I've copied and so that I can get it out the door and over to somewhere safe very, very rapidly. And so that's the design premise of the product in a general sense. And then these VMs scale out so that all of the jobs necessary to protect large scale data sets can be divvied up amongst them.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a fantastic metaphor too. Thanks, Joe. uh, so yeah, and then so going back to this, right? We've got this foundation. We with AWS, we've got not just polite knocking, but very precise and scalable options within Rubrik to help protect the data. When it's landing in AWS, talk to us about the S3 storage classes, Girish. And
Absolutely.
then specific to unstructured data, go ahead and frame it up for us.
Yeah, so I mean, when you're using NAS Cloud Direct, right, you have to choose. One of the options is choosing where you want to keep your backup data. And as part of that, right, you would choose Amazon S3. So when you choose Amazon S3, you will be given all these options here. So you can see the storage classes. So basically, when you look at Amazon S3, right, it is divided. It has a bunch of storage classes. So these storage classes are categorized based on the frequency of access. For data that needs to be accessed with the millisecond latency, we offer storage classes like S3 standard, infrequent access, intelligent tiering, and one zone I. And we recently added, recently as of 2021 reInvent, we announced a Glacier Instant Retrieval. Now, this storage class provides very cost-effective storage options for storing your data that needs to be stored for long term and is rarely accessed. But when you want to access it, it should be immediately available. So all of these, these can be a good fit for keeping your active backup data, the one where you need to do most of your recoveries from. And when you want to do a recovery, your data is available as soon as possible, right, with a millisecond latency. Now, so that's one type of backup data that you have, right? And then the second type of backup data that you have is your data that needs to be stored for long term, right? So where you need to meet your compliance requirements and things like that, right? Where you're keeping backup data for a period of 7 years or so. Where immediate access is not a real requirement, right? You can wait for, let's say the RTO can be around 24 hours or so. And this is great for yearly backups and things of that nature. So for these type of backups, we have storage classes like Glacier Flexible Retrieval and Glacier Deep Archive that provide very economical long-term storage. So Rubrik supports all of these storage classes, and you as customers, as I mentioned, you just have to go in the product when you're when you're choosing your storage class as a backup repository. You see all these options based on your use case. You would go and choose one of those, right? So as simple as that.
That's great. And we're going back to that flexibility. There's performance. There's this great foundation, and then you're able to evaluate what's going on within your company, what your unstructured data needs are, and then make some decisions. And this was really the core of what we wanted to cover: is there is technology to help with the modern needs for storing and securing your unstructured data. And this was a fantastic overview. To talk, I wouldn't say overview. I want to say thank you for talking about the specifics of that. And I want to zoom out again. And Joe, if you could go ahead and share your screen, I'm going to go ahead and have us jump into the demo. And really, this conversation we've had leads into this. The solution that you choose to use. We want your users to have an affinity for it, right? Adoption is really important. We've talked about some other things: ease of use, the precision, the speed, the scale, and really it's the experience in bringing it together is going to help you make that decision about what's right for what your team and your business need, right? So Joe, I'm going to hand it over to you to give us a demo of Rubrik Security Cloud and the NAS Cloud Direct offering. And to walk us through that.
Sure, thank you. So I'm actually logged in already because the act of logging in is never fun to watch during a demo. But essentially, this is our hardened SaaS platform for delivery of all data protection and data security services offered by Rubrik. We refer to this as the Rubrik Security Cloud. So when I'm first logged in here, I can choose my landing page, but for me, I typically land on this dashboard here that is my data protection dashboard. This shows me all of the cloud, SaaS, and data center activities that I'm executing for protection of my data. Now for my unstructured data, I'm actually going to go in here to clusters where I'll see a lot of my Rubrik cluster appliances that run the CDM software platform. And then I'm going to find this lean tile down here at the bottom. This lean tile says NAS Cloud Direct VM. This is indicative of my site where I've deployed NAS Cloud Direct. I may have one or more of these tiles because I'm operating NAS Cloud Direct in more than one data center or more than one region of the cloud. And so for me, I'll go ahead and open this, and it's going to launch the interface for this protection type. This interface is a temporary solution that will be transitioned away from as we migrate these functionalities into the core of Rubrik Security Cloud. But suffice it to say, operations of this product is all done through Rubrik Security Cloud. There's no other front door. It is secured behind our SaaS platform. So in a general sense, when I first log in, it's going to take me to the systems page where I can add systems for protection or manage ones I've previously added. But like all things with Rubrik, we're very much a policy-driven solution. We don't want to get into the business of managing jobs and having to break up our data sets into small units of work to execute and manage and maintain. And so we have a policy-driven, policy-first approach to the backup world. So let's start with policies here within NAS Cloud Direct. So within NAS Cloud Direct, we can create two types of policies. You can see there's a handful here already created in my demo environment, but I'll talk through the two types. We have the backup policy type and the archive. The main difference is that a backup is scheduled and run on a periodic frequency, whereas an archive is executed manually. Both types of policies execute in an incremental forever fashion. So one first full backup to any given storage target, and then continued incremental forever just changes from that point forward, given the frequency. Now with the archive, that frequency may be your manual execution. And then expiration works like you'd expect from a backup or an archive. So pretty standard stuff there from that perspective. Now, when we get into creating a policy, we'll define a window during which we want these new jobs to launch. So this is like establishing my backup window. During this time, new backup jobs will be launched where this policy has been assigned. I'll configure that, and then I'll select my frequency. We can get as aggressive as every 12 hours or as infrequent as monthly. But to be honest, most of my customers use a daily posture. They want to get the changes that have occurred over the last 24 hours, and they want to store those somewhere securely. So when we talk about sending data to Amazon, first we'll connect our account. When we connect our account, we're providing the IAM user credentials via the key pair that's generated associated with that account. And in our user manual, we prescribe things like the role that you should assign to that user so that it can access the S3 bucket and any S3 bucket policies that need to be aligned to that access. We also support going over the direct connect. If a customer has a direct connect in their environment and would like to leverage that connectivity, they can use the VPC endpoints to reach the S3 service and gain that access, keeping that traffic between their data center and AWS, avoiding the open public internet. So all things are possible there. From there, we can either add our bucket here and create a new one, or we can just select one that we already have. Oh, well, that's what I meant to do, but it looked like it wants me to do it now. So I'll just go ahead and pick a region and say new bucket. And it's going to check for that bucket. But okay, well, now I'm getting a little bit buggy in my environment here. Why are we misbehaving? There's my bucket. There was my bucket. All right, give me a moment here, folks. It's always fun when we do live demos. At any rate, it wants to be picky for me now because it's picking on me because I'm in the middle of a live webinar. So at any rate, I can pick the tier here of storage that I'd like to use. And you can see all those tiers that Girish described for us are represented here. All three tiers of Glacier and the various tiers of standard, including 1ZIA and standard IA. So once I've decided the cost profile for the copy that I'm looking to maintain, perhaps I want to create an operational recovery copy. Maybe I'll use standard or standard IA. I can pick a retention policy of, say, something like 30, 60, 90 days. That gives me something in an online tier of storage that I can rapidly recall and recover from quickly. Or if I'm trying to make a cyber resilient copy and I'm already doing things like snap and replicate, and that covers me for day-to-day operational and disaster recovery needs, this is more my cyber resilient copy of data, I can take advantage of Deep Archive. And I can send that data there for probably the full duration of my long-term retention requirements. and then I'll be covered from there. If I wanted to make a secondary copy of the data, I can absolutely do that by adding another leg of the policy and specifying the remaining settings here unique for this copy. So that allows me to do both of what I described, right? Keep that short-term online copy and maintain a long-term deep archive cost-efficient copy. So plenty of flexibility here in the policies. We have plenty. I'm not going to go ahead and save that one. Now walking back out to systems. When we want to add a system, it's as simple as clicking Add System, selecting the type from the dropdown. Again, if it's an API supported system, the way that that's going to operate is, I'll just pick on the first one on the list here. We're going to go ahead and connect to that array using a privileged user account, either the root or admin, depending on what the super user is for that platform. But we're not going to persist that credential. We're just going to use it one time here. We're going to connect. We're going to establish a credential beachhead for ourselves by creating a user with the least privileges that we require locally on the storage array. So in the case of this PowerScale Isilon platform, we're going to go ahead and create a user in the system zone. Then we're going to create users in the data access zones that will grant us access to those data sets. We'll also manage our own permissions for export rules for NFS data sets. So once you use the credentials here, they're discarded. If you don't want to use those credentials, or maybe as an administrator of a backup platform, you don't have access to those credentials, you can ask the storage admins to create you a special account with privileges documented in our user guide and use that for the one-time addition of the array through this process. And then they can delete or disable that account when they're ready. So pretty simple structure there in terms of adding it. So once the array is added, we'll enumerate all the shares and exports and namespaces on the arrays, and we'll be able to configure our protection. So I can come in here, I can select the data set, I can select its protection. So for example, I have an AWS policy here. I could apply that. And then I can pick to set up any exclusions I require, meaning maybe some data sets within this environment in certain directories or of certain file types don't need to be protected. I can absolutely set those things up. When I'm ready to do a recovery, I'll click on Restore. I'll pick any of the points in time that I've protected the data over, and I can view and browse those, do full recoveries, do file level recoveries, even search against them based on the data that lives in the index within the control plane. Again, the virtual machines are stateless, so if we lose one of them, it's completely inconsequential, just redeploy it. There's nothing of consequence living on that virtual machine, just the binaries necessary to move data quickly and index it. So recovery is quite simple, protection very easy. And then if I need to, I can execute a policy immediately, or I can take a larger data set at the export or share level, and I can break it out by subdirectory. So you can see here we have a thin provisioned, of course, in my lab, 3.9 petabyte NFS export, quite large. We've broken that out, you can see by this icon here, as a single directory, the engineering directory, and that allows us to uniquely apply a policy to it when we're ready. So we can very quickly protect a data set with a unique set of requirements that lives under the share or export level, giving flexibility to how we set things up. Now, when we need to monitor activities, we can go to the Activities tab. We can view all the things that are going on. Looks like I got a couple failures here in my lab I can look at after we're done here today. And then if I need to, I can search the entirety of my index. Now, the index is actually stored in AWS S3. The control plane for this product, in fact, lives in AWS. And so the technology that we built is very quickly able to access that index and provide results rapidly. So I can do quick searches for things like, show me all the PDFs in my environment. And we can see that these things come back really rather immediately. So lots of flexibility there in terms of the ability to search and recover the data that you're looking for. Now, lastly, and a little bit of icing on the cake, if you will, we also have the ability for lifecycle management. So we have this feature within the product called Data Discover, included with the product, not a separate feature, where you can set 4 buckets of time ranges and report on last accessed and last modified attributes of all of your file data. You can also build views, what we call live views, into this, basically windows into specific data sets that you might wish to share these details about with other organizations or teams within the company. So this gives you the ability to table conversations for lifecycle management of the data. Things like, should we purge this? Should we archive this? Should we do both? What's the way we want to handle this, right? Because typically we store all this unstructured data on the most expensive platform imaginable, our primary storage array. The idea here is maybe some of that doesn't need to be on the primary storage array. The company still wants to keep it, or the organization still wants to keep it. Let's look at ways we can remove it from there and archive it out into the cloud and keep it in S3 in a more cost-efficient manner. So lots of flexibility. And we also gather the user and group information, ownership basis for the files, as well as hard links. So if you have any hard links in your workflows, we do track those as well as part of these data discover capabilities. We also have a WAN throttle built into the product. So I know some customers have finite bandwidth to operate with. So finally, I'll go ahead and point out that we can absolutely set a throttle to ensure that we're not overrunning any circuits. These VMs are very voracious users of bandwidth. They're extremely capable of reading data off the source storage system and writing it out to the target in S3. They're also as capable of restoring that data. So setting a limit here ensures that your network team doesn't come knocking on your door, threatening your life because you've consumed the entirety of the direct connect circuit with this product, which is very, very achievable. So in a general sense, full control here. One thing to kind of point out as well is, like, as fast as this product moves, it does so politely. So when we execute commands to read, list, or stat data, we're measuring the latency of those commands in every case. And we're keeping those threads that we use for every job at a level that keeps us below a configured threshold of latency. Now, there are some configured defaults, but those are certainly tunable with the assistance of Rubrik support. So long story short, we won't melt the array out of the rack just by virtue of doing backups or taking archived copies of the data sets. So definitely rest assured we're safe in that regard. But yeah, that's essentially the sum total of the demo there. So I'll go ahead and stop my sharing and hand it back to the team.
And I'd pick you as my tire gunner for the quick moves you had there when the demo gave you some trouble. Like you said, nothing like that to raise the blood pressure a little bit, but then you came through. Appreciate that. And I also, I'm thinking of all these shows that have come out recently exposing the behind the scenes on Formula One. And, again, you've put that nice wrapper around how polite Rubrik is about helping you maintain this. And we've had this amazing discussion. Thank you again, Girish and Joe, for sharing the strengths of AWS and Rubrik to help with unstructured data. And as I think about that, and our listeners who, again, have to either start this or optimize their journey today, like, you want to have a sponsor behind you who's going to have all of that amazingness, that great support, and also do so in a way that, as Joe so eloquently said, like, doesn't make people come banging and pushing through your door to get business done. So this was an awesome exchange. I really appreciate it. I do want to do one thing or mention one thing before we take questions. So Scott, I'd love for you to help us queue up what's in the Q&A queue. Call out to the handouts, as Scott mentioned earlier. If you haven't already, go ahead and take a look at those, some really awesome resources. And then also scan the QR code. We are giving away a $100 gift card for meeting with Rubrik and AWS together. So awesome opportunity to take advantage of. I'm going to leave that up here so that you can scan that. And Scott, what type of questions do we have?
Yeah, lots of questions came in. By the way, great discussion, great demo there, Joe. Appreciate that. So the questions that the first one here is from Neil, who's asking, what is lots of NAS data? Petabytes, terabytes? Does it depend on business landscape? And I guess I'll just shade that question a little bit, asking, just sort of how much data can you manage with this product? And what if you have more than 10 petabytes?
No, great question. So we do have several customers with quite a bit more than 10 petabytes. This product was designed for, relatively speaking, that scale, the petabyte scale, the tens of petabytes, the hundreds of petabytes. The idea here is that given enough bandwidth between source and target, this product can scale to meet the demands of moving that amount of data. So given the balance on the network, this product has the capability to push around many, many petabytes, probably well into the exabytes as networks increase in their bandwidth and capabilities.
And doing some research for another event, I learned that recently, I think it's ronabytes and ketabytes are some of the new ones that have been set up for the.
I hadn't even heard those.
Yeah, like Goodness. November of 2022, they were standardized. Let's see. Another question here. from Anupam, who's asking, how do you send the data in-house? An FTP site or physical disks?
No, great question. So, we talked about sending data out to the cloud to S3, but we can also maintain a copy on-prem using that second copy function that I showed in the policy there. And the things that we support on-prem are things that are S3 compatible from an object storage perspective, or simple NFS targets. So targets that speak NFS version 3, we can write our large binary objects into those as we're protecting the data off of the source storage systems. So a little bit of flexibility there in terms of keeping a copy on-prem as well as optionally keeping that copy in the cloud.
Another one we've got here, went through different sort of storage classes from S3. Is recovery from Glacier automated?
Right. Great question. Right. Because basically what happens, Glacier is an offline tier of storage. It's blobs kept in, or objects rather kept in an offline state. And so those need to be rehydrated into the standard tier of S3 before they can be read and copied out of S3. Now, that takes some time. That takes some time for the first byte to appear. And that's all documented in the Glacier tiers and Amazon S3's documentation. So you can see how long that might take. The product, the way it's designed, is to understand the tier of every object that we're attempting to get. So as we make the API call, we're reading the object tier of that object, and we will act accordingly. Meaning, if I need to wait for that to be rehydrated or make the call for that to be rehydrated, we most certainly will. So that's taken care of through due course of a recovery job, as it were.
Okay, super.
Just one clarification I want to provide here is that there is a storage class which we covered called as Glacier Instant Retrieval. So this does not apply to that, right? So with that, even though the name says Glacier, data is instantly accessible in that. So if customers are using that storage class, you can do immediate recoveries there. Just wanted to make sure I point that out.
Super.
Very cool.
Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Next question here comes from Brian, who's wondering, I understand how you use AWS on the back end to create long-term storage, protection, recovery. You mentioned the findability of files. So how do you help with that? And then he's got a follow-up question that I'll ask after that. So
sure.
So the findability of files.
Sure. One of the other unique things and one of the leading contributors to the performance of the product is how we take the workflow approach. So the typical workflow of protecting unstructured data is to first scan to detect changes or understand what it is we're about to copy for the first time if it's the first full. Then we index the data or then we copy the data that we scanned out to the target, and then we index it. That's typically done in a serial fashion by most products in the marketplace. The way this product was designed, and uniquely so, is it does all three of those phases in parallel. So as we're scanning and as we're fetching, we're indexing. So those indexes are stored durably in S3, in the control plane, in your tenant, in our secure hosted multi-tenant environment that we operate out of AWS. So when a customer needs to read their indexes, they go through the UI or the API and they make a query, and that query through the infrastructure is forwarded into that S3 bucket, which is uniquely capable of delivering responses for bulk requests quite rapidly. So that's essentially how those rapid recalls that I showed in the demo, where I looked up all the PDFs that we had protected with the product to date, were able to come back so rapidly.
Okay, great. And the follow-up from Brian is he's also concerned about post-breach being able to identify who was in the data in order to comply with, must report laws. So how does the SWAT team grabbing everything give him that findability?
So if he's auditing his platform, the storage array, for any user that's accessing the data, it will very easily report on the user that we provision on the array for our access. So if they see the access, they'll see it. If they see it for any other user, they'll see it for our user as well. It's just that the techniques that we take are a leaned out version of each respective protocol's RPC calls for gathering the data, for reading the data, statting it, so on and so forth. There's typically a back and forth exchange in the common protocol approach from like the open source technologies, for example. And it's a leaning out of those things. So rather than making 8 calls to read a copy of data, we're making like 1 or 2. So it's a much faster approach by leaning out the number of calls. But the auditing will work all the same. So the users that are accessing the data, if they're being audited, our user will be part of that audit. So you'll be able to see that as well if that's part of your compliance or regulatory needs.
Okay, super. Thanks. And just a quick reminder that we're probably going to have we'll probably got time for one or two more questions here. But if you haven't grabbed that QR code or any of the handouts in the resource area, you've still got time to do it, but not too much longer. This next question comes from Naeb, who's asking, when talking about data, which is critical in nature, like financial data, how can one say it would be secure on cloud? Hence, major organizations are trying to have everything on premise. So I guess I'll just sort of throw that out there. I don't know if anybody wants to jump on that one.
Girish, maybe you can speak to some of the certifications and things that AWS has for S3 that allow the financial institutions to use that service. Oh, Girish, you're on mute. We're not hearing you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you guys hear me now?
Yep, we hear you.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, when you're keeping the data around, right? I mean, on S3, it is, as Joe mentioned, right? You have policies in place which will grant access only to users who are authorized to see that data. By default, whenever you create S3 buckets, public access is, blocked, right? So you have to go and explicitly turn it on if you want to, but which we don't recommend at all. So you have to create policies there. The product creates policies automatically for you, and the product follows the privilege of the perimeters of least access permissions, right? So only folks who need to have access to the bucket data have access to it, and only a reduced set of permissions are available, right? So in the sense that if you can grant certain users read-only access so that they don't go and change the data over there, things like that right over there. That's one. Second is Amazon S3 provides features such as S3 object lock that if you want you can turn on the bucket. So what that does is it gives you immutability capabilities. So once you turn that on, you cannot go and touch that data at all. You cannot modify it at all until unless you don't hit a certain time period over there. So all these security-based primitives are built into Amazon S3, and you can of course use those with Rubrik's products. Now that being said, we do have a lot of financial customers in the financial industries using AWS actively, right? I mean, folks like Capital One, and there are many other publicly available case studies that are available on AWS website. So please go take a look at those for more information on that.
All right, super. And I think we are running up on time here. Natasha, if somebody wants to get started with Rubrik and AWS or find out more, you've talked about a few things. Any sort of closing thoughts on best next steps for people?
The QR code is the first and the most logical for what we've talked about today. So I'll start there. The second would be at Rubrik.com. You're going to find everything you need, including all the details about our partnership with AWS. So those are two things I would start with. The handouts that we've provided and the work coming out of the Zero Labs at Rubrik is incredibly useful, and I would say that would be in my top. Those would be my top three things where I would go to start. And checking us all out. We're all out on LinkedIn, so you can also reach out there. And I'm really grateful, Girish and Joe, for you guys sharing today, and everybody who tuned in, and Scott for your assistance here from Actual Tech.
My pleasure, and
Awesome.
thank
Thanks
you
for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Girish and Joe and Natasha. Great discussion. Really appreciate all the insights.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I'm gonna let these three guys, these three go and get on with their busy day. Really appreciate your time, and we'll go to the prize drawing here. So our Amazon gift card prize drawing today, the winner of that $250 Amazon gift card is Mike Hochstein from Pennsylvania. So congratulations to Mike. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Rubrik and AWS for making this event possible. And thanks as always for attending and for all of your great questions. Your questions really drive these events. We design them so that you can get your questions asked and you get the information that you need. But we really appreciate when you ask those questions. It helps everybody. So that concludes today's event. Have a great weekend. If you're in the US, have a fantastic Memorial Day, and we will see you next time.